welcome to AI in Africa. As the first part of this event series that we're hosting with Flipped-In Technologies and in partnership with the French South African Chamber of Commerce, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you all here today. So this webinar is focused today on the question of diversity and inclusion. So specifically, if AI is a tool, how should we be building it? How does diversity and inclusion going to define the future of AI? So this webinar today is brought to you by Flipped-In Technologies under their brand AI in Africa, and is part, as I said, of a series of webinars which we're going to be carrying out over the course of the year. So a warm welcome to you here. And of course, it is my pleasure to be representing the French South African Chamber today. So welcome to all those joining us here as you're slowly coming in. Today we're going to be discussing AI as a tool and specifically diversity and inclusion. So a warm welcome to all of you joining us today, whether you're based in the US, whether you're based in France, or whether you're like us and based in a very dark and gloomy South Africa. A big welcome to all of you here today. And joining us today as we unpack the issue of diversity inclusion in AI is Mustafa Zouane, who's a tech entrepreneur. He's the co-founder and CEO of Flipped-In Technologies. Also joining us is Karen Nadasen, who is the country manager of PayU and chair of the board of e-commerce South Africa. We are also joined from San Francisco, I believe, by Valerie Morinia, who is the founder and CEO of Intelligent Story, and as well is a tenured associate professor of the University of Montpellier III. And last but not least, we also have Nomso Kana, who is a nuclear scientist, governor of NEFA and presidential 4IR commissioner. A warm welcome to all of our panelists here today. Thank you for joining us, for lending your time, but more importantly, lending your expertise. And it is an absolute pleasure to welcome you all as panelists, particularly in South Africa, as we have just celebrated Women's Month in August. So this is really a powerhouse panel full of women in tech. So it's fantastic. And I look forward to, and I'm sure everyone here today looks forward to engaging with you. And of course, Mustafa, it is always a pleasure to have you as well. So the format for today's session, we're just going to have a brief introduction from Mustafa. Then we're going to go into a dialogue session or a panel discussion with our panelists here today, and it's going to be moderated by Karen, following from which we are going to be having a Q&A session. So there's two options today. Really, we encourage this dialogue. So whether you have any questions or you would like to comment or contribute to the conversation, really, although we've got some African perspectives here today, it's really, we welcome global and multidisciplinary perspectives. So feel free to jump in during the Q&A session and give your perspectives on the matter as well. So before I hand over to Mustafa, just a couple of announcements. As I mentioned before, this is the first of a series of webinars on AI. And really today it's about engaging, kickstarting that dialogue. So we also have tickets up for grabs today for the AI Expo Africa, which is one of the largest business-focused seminars based on AI, robotic process automation, as well as data science trade event in Africa. So for all those who want to get engaged there are some tickets up for grabs. So really we welcome your enthusiasm on the topic. So please do post your questions. You can do so in two ways, either through the Q&A box located below, or alternatively, you can raise your hand and we will unmute you and you can ask your questions verbally or give your comments as you wish. So really, please don't be shy, get involved in the session. And also I'd like to take the opportunity today to also say going forward, we would be keen to get your sense of diversity inclusion, whether it's on a personal level or in your company. So I'm going to be posting a link in the chat box below, which you can follow and also answer two questions, which will broadcast at the end. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Mustafa. And for those who are still coming in, welcome to our webinar, and we look forward to chatting with you.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, everybody, to be here today. It's great to see familiar faces. For those who are joining now, we are on the AI in Africa Ethics series, and we will be talking about diversity and inclusion in AI. But before that, let me do a quick introduction for the people who are not too familiar with what we're doing. At AI in Africa, we aim to empower the youth for an inclusive future with AI. We started last year. We've been on the road to enable 1 million dream builders within 5 years. What we do, we gear learners for the future of work by imparting a powerful combination of problem-solving skills, creativity, collaboration, ethics. We try to turn them into creative thinkers with the ability to reframe problems and also to experiment with homegrown AI solutions. So we draw on an ecosystem of schools, educators, innovators, entrepreneurs, executives, leaders in the communities, technologists, to scale for impact and reach. Basically, people such as yourself. We're currently launching a new course on design thinking and AI applied to sustainable development, targeted at corporates and youth in collaboration. So if you're interested in this discussion, you're welcome to connect to us again. This is in addition to our existing project-based engagements between mentors and learners that are moving partly online. And also we're relaunching the next phase of open community innovation challenges. Now for today, this ethics series will be edited and then aired to schools with live Q&A session with mentors, as we cannot access school general assemblies at the moment, as you all aware. This series is the beginning of a set of talks. And the next topic will be actually on data privacy at the end of the month. It will be a focus on legal aspects. And the one after that, it will be a lot more tech focused. And I think some of these two topics, our participants are visiting us today on this webinar. The next one will be on bias in supervised learning algorithm. So if you are a mentor, a speaker, a curriculum partner, an organization that shares similar values, connect to us. So for today, diversity and inclusion. Let's start maybe with one definition to level a little bit the field. From our perspective, maybe diversity, we can say that it relates to the level of balance of people, mostly in the workplace, and inclusion to whether this diverse group of people are having an equal experience at work. Therefore, the end goal will be for organizations not only to focus on diversity, but to create both a diverse and inclusive future where everyone can thrive. That's the ideal world. In a context where future of work is not so clear, where AI tools will disrupt our workplace and society and probably exacerbate further existing inequalities. What can we do now to bridge these existing gaps? How do we prepare for a different tomorrow while we're actually in the middle of creating these AI programs? And this is what the panelists and the amazing people today will be discussing. And we'll welcome all your comments and questions in the second part of the session. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very, very much, Mustafa. And on that note, let's get right down to the conversation. Karen, I'm going to hand over to you to give us a bit of an introduction and to lead the discussion with our other powerhouse panelists today. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Amy. I'm really thrilled to be included in the very first AI in Africa digital series and to be joined by these incredible women, Valerie and Nomso. I'm looking forward to a really insightful discussion today. So as you know, the technology industry in South Africa is not very much different in terms of diversity and inclusion numbers to that of the US and the top 10 global companies, technology companies in the world, where we have a male dominance by about 80%. Now, if we look at my field, financial technology and e-commerce, we know that e-commerce purchasing decisions are largely dominated by women in South Africa. That's about 65%. Which is quite considerable number. If we look at the US, we're looking at about 75%. So we run the risk by not having teams that are diverse in technology, that we're really not creating, designing solutions and creating software that really talks to the consumer. At PayU, I lead the Diversity in Africa strategy, and there are a number of initiatives that we're running. And as chair of the EFSA, one of my board members, Mpho Sequela, is running a series of interviews and case studies where we start to discuss and tackle the issues of financial inclusivity, diversity, and the empowerment of women. These have been taken up by the UN Council for Trade and Development. Now, AI aims to replicate human behavior and the human way of learning, which occur within the context of the communities in which it exists. In those communities, if those communities have forms of social and cultural bias or discriminatory attitudes towards certain people and ideas, the AI will adopt these and serve to amplify them further. So Valerie, I know you have a lot of experience in multidisciplinary teams. Could you please elaborate on what a team should look like when designing AI platforms? Valerie, you're on mute.
Oh, all right. Thank you, Karen. I like to say that diversity, inclusion, and interdisciplinarity are really the amino acids of what we call responsible AI design. And we know from research that unfortunately, good solutions are not coming out of teams that are not diverse and that are not representative of the diversity in the world, but also of cognitive diversity. And cognitive diversity really comes from the confrontation of multiple perspectives, of multiple disciplines. And I think it is important to realize that AI is inherently a multidisciplinary field, right? I mean, throughout history, a variety of views and disciplines have really brought AI into existence. And that's true today. And that's even truer today, I would say, in an age where AI gets integrated in every layer of society and life. Humanities and social sciences are really leading the conversation about AI ethics, AI governance, AI social impacts, AI economics. And those questions cannot be resolved by computer science alone or engineering alone. It has to bring really multiple disciplines at the table, and it has to be a very, very inclusive conversation.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you for actually touching on those various aspects and how important inclusivity is in relation to that. You know, it has the potential to solve complex problems, and when we include technology in human activity, sometimes we forget serious things like safety, security, reliability, fairness, accountability, or transparency. We can't develop technology first and think about the consequences later. At AI in Africa, we focus on design thinking, problem definition, and empathy as a core foundation to build projects. So another question for you, Valerie, here to just lead on from the previous one was, as a leader in human science, what are the approaches and techniques that are required to build human-centered designed AI? And can you share some good examples and some bad examples of what you've seen in practice?
Yes, I would say that a bad example would be a team that is not inclusive of people who are on the design side, but also on the psychology side, people who are not experts in socioeconomics, or very importantly, people who are not experts in ethics. So I would say that to design good algorithms, we need to first design teams that are encompassing all those specialties. So any AI team should have received training in ethics. And I can think of a variety of examples here. For instance, that's an example that I find really compelling. I think it was last year, MIT trained a model that was capable of predicting the risk of developing breast cancer with equal precision for white and Black patients. And you would think that this should be what every algorithm is able to do, right? To deliver the same level of reliability for white and Black patients. But that's not the case of every algorithm. And that algorithm was able to deliver this absolutely fantastic outcome because it was trained on a very diverse data set. It was intentionally trained to be inclusive and to deliver the same level of performance to various demographics. So that's the result of a work that has been from the get-go inclusive of various demographics. Now let's talk about bad examples. A few years ago, a tech giant that I'm not going to name, but I'm pretty sure everybody can identify it very easily, used machine learning to hire candidates for a software engineering role. And what happened after a little while is that the hiring manager was systematically only receiving male candidates' resume, which was an oddity, right? Because of course there are tons of talent on the tons of talented women that had applied for this role. What happened is that the data that had been used to train the algorithm was only coming from resumes that had been submitted over a 10-year period. And those resumes were just reflecting the male dominance in the tech industry. So the AI just concluded that male candidates were actually a better fit. And that's what a biased algorithm is. It's an algorithm that has been trained on data that is absolutely not reflective of the diversity in the world, and that on top of this is just amplifying a prejudice that pre-exists to the technology. And we find this in many other areas of AI, as for instance, facial analysis and facial recognition. Facial analysis has been proven as a technology that has not the same level of accuracy depending on the skin color of the person. And that again comes from the fact that the data that has been used is predominantly data coming from white male. So we need to make sure that the data that is used to train algorithms is actually not reinforcing existing prejudice in the world, but on the contrary, is really building what I like to call diversity by design from an outcome perspective. So you understand that we cannot achieve that if we do not train people in questioning their representations and questioning the negative impact that our representations can have on the world. And so that starts there. It really starts with educating people to think differently, and that is really something that can be helped by encompassing an inclusive variety of disciplines in AI teams.
And Valerie, you know, we see the same problem with AI digital assistants. You know, Jeff Bezos, I believe, revealed a year ago that Alexa received 250,000 marriage proposals. And I think it begs the question of why are so many digital assistants presented as female? Is this the assumption in society around clerical workers or being white, middle class, and female? And then it begs the question of, is it even right to have AI resemble humans at all?
I think it's a fantastic question because, you know, very interestingly, every time we think about AI and we go, say, search for a stock image that could represent AI, what we see is the representation of a human brain systematically. And that's the simplest representation we can find for AI. And that is a representation that I find actually very inaccurate, because we started thinking of AI as what would be the reproduction, the emulation of human intelligence in a machine. And today we know that intelligence is very hard to define, and it draws from actually a variety of fields and a variety of perspectives. And so whatever representation we use to communicate about AI, I think should take a little bit of distance from the human beings, from the human representation itself, and very importantly, to go back to the example you first chose. I don't think it's I don't think it's accurate, and I don't think it's right to actually systematically, of course, choose the form of a female to embody an assistant, a digital assistant, because of course this is again just the projection of a stereotype that exists in society, and I think we need to actually take a little bit of distance from that, so we can build better idea, and we can think of artificial intelligence in a more creative way. Intelligence is multidimensional. It's today much more difficult to replicate in machines than we thought in the past. And the definition of intelligence really vary. It varied throughout history, and it will still evolve. And I think we need to think of digital assistants, digital agents, intelligent programs in a more agnostic fashion, to be more inclusive and to be more diverse also from a creative perspective.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, one of the problems that we're facing now is that we, the media, pretty much amplifies these injustices that we have seen in relation to AI, with regards to hospitals, courtrooms, and some of the biases that you've been talking about now. So, you know, how we need to create a trust culture in relation to AI, and how can this be done when it's earned a bit of well, currently it's actually earning a distrust.
I think it's important indeed to talk about trust, because trust is the first step to adoption, but it's also absolutely key to implementing accurate predictions that AI is also capable of. And to create trust, I think we need to address fears. And we cannot address fears, the natural fear that people have in face of change, but also the natural fear that people can have in face of a technology that is often represented particularly in science fiction, as a threat to humanity, as something that is going to replace them, something that is going to decide for them. Okay. So I think it's very important to address trust from the perspective of addressing fears. And we have two ways to achieve this. The first one, like I mentioned earlier, is to really address our representations. What is AI? Let's make sure that we educate people on what AI can do and what AI cannot do. And so we can also teach people that AI is not going to anytime soon replace them, make them obsolete. On the contrary, AI will be there to potentially amplify human intelligence and improve what humans already do without replacing them. So that's something that is very important to say. Now, if we want to make sure that trust can reasonably be earned and maintained, we also need to address all the risk that are inherent to using AI. Risk of bias, risk of misuse, risk of abuse of AI tools as we see today. We have everyday bad examples of AI, what AI can do. So very simply, it starts with using ethical principles that I think the ethics community around the world has agreed upon, such as fairness, transparency, privacy, inclusiveness, accountability, beneficence, reliability, human in the loop, making sure also that when the end user wants to talk to a human being, he can or she can. Making sure that transparency is not just a pretty word that companies are going to check, you know, on their list of ethical guidelines, but really means something from a design perspective. If I am going to be evaluated as a job applicant, for instance, by an AI, I want to make sure that I'm aware of this, I agree to this, and if I have questions on how I was evaluated by this AI, I can either receive a report that is honest, fair, transparent, and understandable in the layman's terms, or I can revert to speaking with a human being about how I was evaluated by that system. So I think it really starts with integrating ethics and making sure also that we are not just checking boxes, but asking very important questions with regarding how AI is used. Why are we using AI in the first place? What are we trying to achieve? Are we really using AI to make this world more fair and more equitable, or are we just using it to perpetuate the status quo? So I think trust will come from those things together.
Wow, thank you. I think you're really stretching and challenging my own thinking, because we're using, as part of the diversity and inclusion strategy, we're tapping into the uses of some AI tools for, within HR. And I actually, I didn't even think about it from the perspective of the candidate should know upfront how they're being evaluated and that AI is being used, and should also have the option of human intervention or being, interviewed by a human or evaluated by a human. I didn't even consider that. I just thought, okay, well, we're using AI and it really is in line with the strategy and it is for good, but not from the candidate's perspective. So this is really, really interesting perspective. Thank you, Valerie, for that.
Thank you. So, I think it does matter, just to react to what you just said. I think just giving people the ability to feel that they are a participant in the system is going to create trust. No one wants to be a passive agent. Everybody wants to have agency. And I do believe very firmly that we can deploy AI in a vast layer of our life and society without removing human agency.
Yeah, incredible. It really is a different way to look at it. And it's a side by side, and the reasons why we're using it really need to be taken into consideration, instead of, everyone really just jumping on that bandwagon. So some really important things that were raised by you. Thank you so much, Valerie.
Thank you.
So, let's take a moment to look at where we are as a country and on our path to transformation. The status on the policies that have been implemented for equal opportunities. And Nomso, I believe you've been doing a lot of work in this space. So I'd really like you to share your experiences as a nuclear scientist in a very male-dominated environment. What's the perspective that you have on this question? And if we applied it across the continent as we enter the fourth industrial revolution. And before you answer, Nomso, I'd also like to say congratulations. I believe you've been selected as by the Mail and Guardian as the top powerful woman for 2020. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Karen. And thank you. Such an opportunity to be in this panel. I think people have picked up, I'm going in and out. We just have load shedding and it's a power cut. So I'm back in dark ages and I'm using my phone as a light. Just to delve into the question, Karen, quite an interesting question and very important. For the development of technology, the deployment of technology is a question on how one can start to look at the parallels in policy and regulation, and also how has those been implemented to ensure that transformation is continuous and ongoing. So I'll tell you a bit of story of myself. So I'm a nuclear scientist. I've worked in the nuclear reactor, practiced and produced some of the best radioisotopes. South Africa is number 3 in the world when it comes to trading of iodine 131. That is a radioisotopes used for chemotherapy treatment, and that is for thyroid. But, getting into this role, obviously, the STEM, science, tech, engineering, and mathematics role models is quite important. I know I grew up without one, and I got to discover nuclear while I was in university. And through that, I've actually quite learned that the country is slowly organically transforming in really in the terms of ensuring that there is representation and also women are in the solutions table. But it's quite organic because there's a lot of stereotypes that needs to be taken out of the equation, a lot of things that needs to be broken down. And as we know that as we are in this era where we have these technologies, you know, unifying and connecting the physical, the biological, and the digital. It's important to have women in that. So
Yeah.
I've seen the transformation policies playing a role in the mining sector, as well as the technology ICT sector, but it is so slow, Karen. I know the financial sector, they only have, in South Africa, they only have 20% female representative out of 151,000 workers in the financial ICT sector, meaning that people are just, you know, doing checklists, ticking box,
Yeah.
you know, crossing the I's and you know, doing all of that, but without really thoroughly implementing transformation policies and these emerging technologies that we have to really ensure that it's. And I believe that you know, the 4IR Commission, some of the recommendations that we have done is to ensure that women play a role in this era, and ensure that some of the technologies that will be incentivized, and if they are female owned, it means that they will be the first to be deployed.
Thank you. Thank you,
Because
Nomso.
this is the way where we are ensuring there is gender equality.
So it seems that we've lost. Nomso, are you back?
I'm back.
Nomso has a nuclear scientist. We are counting on you to actually develop some sustainable alternative energy sources and solve this problem for South Africa.
I am telling you, you know, we have a depleting infrastructure. Our energy infrastructure is depleting. We have a rising population, a demand in all the industrial sectors, but we're still operating on an infrastructure that was built 20 years ago. It's ridiculous. Hence, we have these power cuts. And, you know, even an INCLA scientist, he has to use a torch to be in a live webinar.
No, so you know, you talk a lot about, you know, the policies and some of the regulatory structures. Could you maybe give us some examples? What are the kind of policies and structures we need to put in place to remove some or work through some of these disparities and inequalities? Because there's some important points that you mentioned there. We didn't quite hear you very clearly, but you spoke about the policies that are currently in place, the problem of just ticking boxes, and you know, we've got sizable issues in South Africa from our past, our history, that need to be solved, and just ticking boxes is not really good enough, you know. So maybe just talk through a bit of those policies.
Okay, these are the ICT sector codes that ensures, you know, women like you and me and Valerie are represented in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange companies. Currently, the stock exchange companies do not have a single representation. And, you know, the excuse that they will get, they will say that, you know what, we cannot find women that can fit into these roles, in which is ridiculous. So right now, the ICT codes, they are enforcing that women in every board, from senior levels, even in the corporate, women, there should be at least 49% of women, of female representative. So that's one from the ICT sector. And from the mining sector, knowing that South Africa has about 35 trillion minerals that still needs to be mined. So there's also a call for a representation for women to be in the mining sector. I mean, right now, some of the technologies that are required, they need essential minerals that can only be mined in the Southern Africa. For example, manganese, bismuth, cobalt that are used in the renewable energy sector. They are still in the Southern Africa, and there is no, utter representation of females within that. So the mining sector is actually calling for women to be in that sector. So it's about two, but I think most of the industries are considering them, but still they don't see a value of females within that. It's quite ridiculous.
Okay, yeah. So, for me, I think technology and AI offers opportunities for women, and we look to these for empowerment in terms of women, financial inclusivity, the empowerment of women, youth, rural communities, in terms of so much that it can offer flexibility as well. And we've got a serious issue with unemployment in South Africa. I believe our stats are now around 30% of unemployment. When we look at women, it's far worse than that. It's around 38%, I believe. There's a McKinsey report that says that, empowering women globally will add another 12 trillion to GDP. So there's some stats out there, and I'm so that when you come across this, you can go back and you say, well, empowering women can contribute a hell of a lot more to GDP growth. So this is really what our focus should be. Valerie, to bring you back into the conversation here. So how do we, considering this, how do we move people to the center of an organization's growth strategy, considering a D&I, so that they can become the focus of not only the organization strategy, but also education, the policies to drive economic growth?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I think that it starts with moving from silos to a cross-functional way of approaching things. And what I mean by that is that very often diversity and inclusion have their own programs, while technology innovation have their own learning and development programs. And those two are not necessarily actually crossing path. And I really believe that it is absolutely key in designing better systems and in removing bias from algorithm. It's actually absolutely key to actually ensure that people who are really experts in diversity and inclusion have a seat at the table, at every table, actually, I should say, every time there's a conversation about innovation, about adoption of AI, and about moving the organization forward from a digital transformation perspective. I think it's key. We talk a lot about bias in algorithms as a big threat, but I really think that today the lack of cultural diversity and the lack of representation of the diversity of human beings is really a threat to the evolution of AI and to AI itself, and it's a threat to the way AI will impact actually society. So I think that it's really paramount to ensuring that, cultural diversity is paramount to ensuring the universal right to access and benefit from technology innovation. So from an organizational perspective, I think that, like I said, we need to stop secluding competencies within silos, and we need to make sure that we approach the organization more from a cross-functional perspective.
Thank you. Nasa, would you like to add to that before we move on to some audience questions?
Look, Valerie has covered it very well. Today I sat in a panel where we have to decide where the data set for facial recognition for an AI machine learning, obviously algorithm that the city of Johannesburg wants to build, and they want to deploy it around the city for security reasons. And to really see the people behind building the algorithm to be just male and white. It was the very first red lights. I was like, from this point, we cannot even start to build. Johannesburg has 70% you know, it's a mixed race. It's Africans, and it's all the race that you can find in South Africa. But to have a representation that is lacking that, that's the era where we're getting all the biasness in the algorithm. So there's a lot of awareness, there's a lot of teachings and unlearning also to be done by these OTT companies. And it's quite important that, you know, strategy in building AI and deploying AI in the public sector, it needs a lot of diversity, inclusion, awareness. So I truly agree with what Valerie has said.
Well, thank you so much, Namso, because I think that you and I are really complementing one another very nicely in this conversation. And you just mentioned the fact that it's very alarming to see that those teams are predominantly male and white, while the world is so diverse and talented can be found absolutely everywhere. And there's lots of women who are really excellent and who should have access not only to roles in that field, but they should be really in those executives teams who are going to lead the charge here in AI. And if I think it's just of numbers in the academic world, for instance, I find very alarming that 88% of researchers in the world who published papers on AI at leading conferences in the last 2 years were men. 80% of professors are men. 75%, that's a number I still have in mind, of undergraduate students in AI are men. And 71% of AI job applicants in the US are men. Does it mean that AI is not for women? Absolutely not. Women, of course, we know, are absolutely amazing contributors in every possible field. But again, our representation of what AI is needs to change. If we do not change our representations today, and that's true for so many fields, we are not going to be able to change that status quo. And we need to urgently change that status quo, because the lack of diversity in this field is a threat to the performance and to the innovation capabilities and to the ethics of AI. I truly believe this is the number one priority.
And we're talking about the creation of the future world, aren't we?
Yeah.
And so imagine sitting here and being comfortable with a future that is created predominantly just by one, you know, kind of specific group. I mean, Okay. Thank you both very much. Amy, I'm going to hand over to you. I believe there's some questions from the audience.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Karen, and to Valerie and Nomso for kickstarting the conversation. I think it's revealed a lot of challenges along the way, and as someone who works in the academic space as well, I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of the space of women, even in in the spaces where policy, I suppose, is really informed from questions. Of course, even of knowledge in terms of how we perceive knowledge from the STEM point of view to, I suppose, even the humanities, and really trying to cultivate that, like you've said, functional and multidisciplinary space, I suppose, is quite a challenge at the moment. And I'm very glad that we have Valerie, Karen, and Nomsa fighting for us on that one. So thank you very much for that. So we're just going to move to a couple of questions. We've got a few questions coming in on social media as well as on the chat. So maybe just to kick off with more of a basic one to set the scene, we have one question from LinkedIn, and it asks very basically, before we get more technical, I suppose, for those who are new to tech and AI, first and foremost, how do machines become biased? And for whoever would like to contribute, and Mustafa, please feel free to jump in as well. And I believe we also have Maurizio, who is a data scientist who's also joined the conversation as an attendee. So Maurizio, please, if you'd like to contribute, please raise your hand, and you're welcome to add to the conversation as well.
I can provide a short answer, so I'll make sure that Nomso has an opportunity also to react to this, because I'm sure she will have a lot to say. Well, machines are not, they do not exist independently of human beings. Let's just remember a very, very basic fact. We design machines, we create machines, we interact with machines. So we project into the bodies of the machines that we create, thousands of years of stereotypes of all the imaginary creatures that we've invented throughout the centuries, right, are projected in our machines. And that means that if we are biased, we are going to project our biases in the machines. Not only in how the machines look like, but what the machines are here to achieve also can be filled with biases. So it starts with the fact that humans are inherently biased and they're not necessarily aware of it. And to become aware of your own bias, you need to confront yourself to people who do not think like you, do not look like you, do not have the same needs. And the second you do that, you open yourself to new perspectives. You're going to make more inclusive choices, and you're going to understand that the data you're using to train those machines, because AI learns from the data it's being fed with, then these data will be chosen differently, because you will have a more open perspective, and you will understand that maybe if you're building a tool that needs to serve everyone, then you should make sure that everyone is in the first place represented in that data.
Yeah, so oh, sorry, Emmy, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but really to echo what Valerie has said, I mean, if your data set is biased and you've labeled it according to your own untapped and research knowledge, then the output is going to be biased also. So it's really that a machine can never be biased. It has been programmed to be biased, and the data set has been biased. So that's the response in short.
Perfect, thanks for that. And that leads on nicely to one of our attendees who has asked two questions relating to the data sets. And I think you alluded to it in your recent discussions or when you counted your recent discussions with City of Johannesburg. And this question asks, how are current data sets sourced? But more importantly, and I think this is the important part of the question, is what gives these data sets credibility for inclusion into a model of training? So in your example, as you've said, in the City of Joburg, where you have, for example, a dominant white male demographic actually making, sourcing these data sets, etc. I mean, what gives it credibility? How are we going to make these more inclusive? What is the model of training?
Thanks, Emmy, for that. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, there are different ways on sourcing and mining data out, especially for facial recognition. And in a public entity, and even in a private entity, you really need to have different and diverse data sets. Obviously, you know, pictures and sources of images are one of the sources where one can start to mine the data set. And you know, deep learning works with a huge data set. So it's quite important that the areas where that data is sourced, it has to be very wide and open. And it has to be very inclusive. I mean, we've been using this word quite a lot today, but it has to be so inclusive in a way that your data set it represents all the elements that you want the output of your machine algorithm to actually give. So the example I've made on how we actually had to, you know, interrogate the team that, you know, already from this team, you will not have good annotation of your data because you don't have representation. So it's no point for you to start to mine our data because you also have no knowledge of the other ethnicities and as well as races. And this is how it's going to be biased from the beginning. Back to you, Emmy.
We can't hear you, Amy.
Although we're speaking about AI and technology, my skills are definitely failing me here today. Apologies for that. I hope you can hear me now. Thank you very much, Nomso, for that one. I think it was quite clear from your description. And I see we have two hands coming from the audience now. So Maurizio, I'm going to go over to you, and you're more than welcome to contribute to the conversation as a data scientist and who works in the field, or alternatively, you can pose your question to the audience. Hi, Maurizio.
Hi, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Welcome.
Oh, great. I'm not sure if I can. Anyway, so yes, on the fairness of the data sets, right? I mean, you know, when it comes to applications like computer vision or you know, data mining, right? Very rarely a company can, you know, build its own data set, right? It's very seldom they do it. If you think of, I mean, face recognition systems or systems that you work on corpus of data. I mean, to train a system like GPT-3, it took like, I don't know, $5 million worth of GPU time to be trained. I mean, how many companies can afford that? So it's important that you, I mean, the bias can come in at different stages, right? It's not just in the data, right? So not everybody can intervene on the data. If you can't change the data, you can still do something, right? So for example, when you build your models, you need to focus on what do you want to optimize? And you know, we know that machine learning algorithms are extremely good at optimizing one metric. But that's what the problem. If you focus on optimizing one accuracy metric, a single one, like, I don't know, usually it's a business metric, then you are in trouble. So that's why some IBM has released their own toolkit, right, with different fairness metrics that algorithm can be checked against, and then you can apply mitigation algorithms to make sure that, for example, the accuracy is more balanced or different protected subsets of the data, right? So this can be done. Even if you can't change the algorithm, even in the scoring, you can intervene with some rebalancing of the outcomes. So there is a lot of things that can be done. But of course, if you are a company for like a bank that is developing, they want to have their own system, AI system to grant loans, then you have much more power to intervene at different stages, right? And then in there, of course, you can check if your system performs well on subset or protected or privileged and unprivileged subset of the data. And if not, you can decide what to include in the predictors of the model, to exclude things that, and you can, you know, test your algorithm. That there is much more power to do that. But it's important that we as practitioners, or we work in the companies, we don't keep quiet, right, when we see that things are not being done as they're supposed to do, right? If we care only at optimizing a business metric, then of course we should instead say, no, look, this algorithm doesn't perform well on this subset of the data. For example, it's granting much more loan to people who live in this area, as of course to people who live in this other area, although they qualify. That way, is maybe a flag that there is some bias that is growing inside the algorithm, right? Because maybe he is taking in consideration some parameters that are proxy for biased one, right? So, and then we can advocate inside companies, you know, to make sure they adopt a more fair and inclusive, if you want, approach when building the system. So we have a big responsibility as data scientists or practitioners to make sure that companies, because probably the people who are our head of departments or our managers, they don't know, right, that certain certain things are not done properly, but they can still, a lot can be done, right? And there is a lot of academic research coming out in the last few years, right, on what can be done to make these algorithms more, to improve the fairness, right, to measure these algorithms and measure the data, whether the data is balanced or not. And from the academic research, then companies like Google and IBM, they're releasing and open sourcing their own toolkits to apply these improvements, right? So it's very important that watchdogs and raise the flags when they see applications that are discriminating around, against minorities, right? As we've seen a lot, especially in the surveillance and in the face recognitions, right? With a lot of research in MIT, in America, we see all sorts of cases of discrimination, right? So from one side, the watchdogs must raise the flag, but also we that we are working inside companies, we must advocate for the companies to adopt a more inclusive approach.
If I can react to what you just said, I think you're absolutely right when you say that there needs to be corporate advocacy really for better better deployment of AI and to ensure that that those algorithms are actually not biased. And I think what you're talking about is the imperative for companies to have to be accountable for the systems they're using. And that starts with having a very clear AI governance. And there are multiple ways to achieve that. And there are today actually mandatory ways to achieve that. Like for instance, I mean, GDPR is predicting that systems needs to be transparent. They need to actually provide a certain level of explanations for their outcomes, which is very difficult to achieve with deep learning, and in some instances impossible to achieve. But it doesn't mean that companies should not try to address it. And I mentioned the example of the use of AI in human resources earlier in the webinar. In that realm, it is absolutely mandatory for companies who are going to use AI-driven HR systems to put in place the necessary, I would say, not just guideline, but really policy on how they are going to regularly assess the reliability of the systems they're using. And if they're using a third-party system, can they access information on how the data was sourced to train that algorithm? Is the algorithm regularly tested against bias? What is the level of auditability of that system in case one day there's a lawsuit against the company? The company will have to explain why this or that candidate didn't get the job, for instance. And if there is any kind of suspicion of disparate impact, then the company will have to ensure that they have access to a certain level of information that can demonstrate that they put in place the necessary safeguards against bias and that candidates were actually treated fairly. And if they can't do that, then they will run into issues. So I think it's very important to make sure that systems are tested for fairness from end to end, even when it's difficult to achieve.
Thank you very much, Valerie and Maurizio, for that one. I'm just a little bit cognizant of time, although I'm thoroughly enjoying this discussion, and those who have attended our live sessions know how much dialogue we like and how things run over. But on that note, I would just like to say a big thank you to Karen. I know she has to leave us quite urgently at 7. So thank you very, very much for your time and your expertise, Karen. If anyone here today would like to get in touch with Karen or has any questions, please pop a message to the French Chamber and we'll be happy to put you in contact with Karen and pay you and what she does as well. So thank you very much, Karen. We're going to bid you farewell and maybe take the last 2 questions if the other panelists allow, and then we're going to wrap up today's section and we can always carry on in the following sessions to come. So thank you, Karen, for your time and your expertise today.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Amy. Thank you to all the panelists.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. And just on that note, I'm just going to move to Lesedi. Thank you very much for your questions, Lesedi. I'm going to, I suppose it will probably be posed to Nomso, but Valerie, please jump in, or Mustafa, jump in at any time. Lesedi wants to know, what regulatory, legislative and compliance challenges have you encountered, perhaps mitigation thereof, in government, eGov and the 4IR space? And also maybe I'd just like to add on to that one, Nomso, where do you think Africa should be positioned in terms of AI regulations? I know you're part of the 4IR Commission, and I know there's been a lot happening in that space and really inclusion in the South African context, but I suppose more globally, where do you see the regulation, you know, how transparent, how regulated, closed, sort of like in your examples of China or Russia, or maybe the more European model? What are your thoughts on the regulation?
Thanks for that. Thanks, Lesedi. You know, in the Commission, we encountered a lot of policies that require immediate change for this era to be really accelerated and for everyone to embrace it. We saw that there were about 166, even more, policies and regulation that need to be changed. And those range from the POPI Act, RICA, on how we should really align to the GDPR, the EU Act on data privacy, data protection. And there's a lot of debate we've had, even within the public sector. I've seen how ministries, for example, perhaps maybe the Home Affairs does not want to trade their data and they don't want to give it to another ministry. So all those things, but as the Commission, we had to make sure that there is that exchange and that integration of data. And also we had to put measures in place, because I've observed that, you know, the OTTs, the global OTTs, have been mining so much data from South Africa, and you know how they resell it, it's quite complex. And we had to break that down in order for our policies to adhere to the current systems, the current global systems, and also to prepare for futuristic regulations that need to be in place. And currently the AU is sitting with the EU, because we do get a lot of help. I do play in the structures, in the gender equality structures of the AU. And we are busy discussing the data privacy. And this includes a lot of, you know, we have to sit down with these OTTs, because they cannot deploy their AI technologies without the consent of Africa. So there's a huge call for policy drafting, because we don't have them, actually. So there's a huge call also for awareness. People don't understand the minute they download a Facebook app in their phone, what it does, what it mines, what it takes from them, what kind of data crawlers are they, and they don't understand those. There's a lot of education that needs to be in place. So it's ongoing work. It's very cumbersome. It requires a lot of you know, collaboration, and maybe perhaps in the next few years, maybe the AU will also call Facebook and tell them, come and account on the data that you've been mining in Africa. I mean, that's some of the things that should happen. They should be transparent to what they do, and also what their application do in the continent.
Thank you, Norm. So I don't know, Valerie, if you have anything to add to that. And I think it's an important, and I suppose for all the South Africans listening, speaking about Europe mining in Africa brings back a lot of bad memories, but thank you for that analogy. So.
Yeah.
I really support what Nomso said. I think transparency is key. Even if it's hard to achieve, it doesn't mean that companies should not do it. And being accountable for the system they build and how they impact on people's life by influencing their choices, by nudging them into decisions every day. I think it is very important for companies to be accountable and to be more transparent. And just to say one thing about GDPR from a French-American perspective, since I'm French living in the United States and working in the United States, I can tell you that GDPR has a very, very strong influence in the regulatory changes and legal changes in the United States too, and the imperative for transparency and explainability, even, or explicability, are very, very strong, even if they are hard to achieve. The right to explanations that exist in GDPR is an important right, and it's very difficult to achieve technologically, but I do think it is meaningful to users, and it makes companies more accountable for what they push forward as systems.
All right, perfect. So I think we sort of coming to the end, but I see we do have Kim who has had her hand raised. So I think we'll take Kim if you want to quickly, very briefly ask your question to Valerie and Nomso, and then I suppose we can start wrapping up the session with you, Mustafa. Kim, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Hi, Kim. Welcome and thank you for participating today.
Well, I'm so excited and inspired by the panelists, also the topic of inclusion. So I'd like to say thank you, ladies, and obviously to the team. My name is Kim August, co-founder and owner of the Brand Station, a content partner to the AI in Africa platform. I'm wondering, is there a new culture emerging from the social interaction with or through AI? I think Valerie and Nomsa touched on it early on. I see a lot of more use using or communicating via TikTok and gaming, adult socializing with like robots, avatars, there's even like robot pets. And I also believe that there's more than 8% of customer interactions that's fully automated these days. Should we be worried about our mental health, interpersonal skills of children these days?
So would you
Thank you
like
for that
to...
question. Yeah, you caught me there, Valerie. Thanks for that question. Look, it's a very good question. And one of the things I've observed in the education sector nowadays, you know, the Gen Zs, age 0 to 22, they prefer learning online and they prefer being taught by AI bots. Some of the most, you know, it's so awkward and weird, but they learn through visualization, they learn through exposure, and right now AI bots in education solutions are being used for that. So there is a negative effect that obviously it's going to happen, because now you know, that whole seclusion and no human interaction plays a role in the mental sector of a person, and it's something that I believe human sciences, psychologists, they need to come up with solutions. I mean, we scientists, we can only do that much in really ensuring you know, technology does not affect, you know, the human development. At the same time, it should harness it and enhance it, but it should not affect it negatively. So I do agree with you. There are some concerns, and I think this is all still ongoing, and it requires a lot of research. Back to you, Emmy.
Thank you very much, Kim, for that question. And I suppose it's always great in these sessions, we speak quite broadly, but it's always great to see how it boils down to the future generations as well. And I suppose that's something we need to keep in mind on that. So I think we slowly have run out of time. So I would just like to do a quick wrap up, or allow Mustafa just to close up the session as part of the AI project. But on behalf of myself, I'd like to thank you very, very much, Valerie and Nomsa, for your insights. It's been fantastic to learn from you, and I will no doubt hopefully be able to pick your brain at a later stage. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Also, I hope your lights come back, and Valerie, I hope the fires subside in San Francisco at this moment, and to everyone to stay safe during these times. So I'm just going to hand over to you, Mustafa, for a closing, and thank you to all the participants. Always a pleasure to partner with our Platinum member, Fliptin. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. I just wanted to make two comments in the discussion that took place just now. One is that actually on the regulatory aspect, I think it's a big question in terms of where do we as Africa want to be? Do we want to be in a freewheeling type AI? Do we want to be in the government type driven, or do we want to be somewhere in the middle, much more aligned to a transparent AI, I would say, of EU? And I think that's a question that we're not educated enough often as a member of the society, of companies, or we feel also sometimes we don't have a say in that. And I think that's an important aspect of how defining our future. And the second aspect is we talk, as we finish on the youth, and we talk about the diversity team. But actually what we're trying to focus us is very much on, reprogram a little bit. That cultural bias that you mentioned, that diversity. And so we focus a lot on empathy as a key. And in fact, we use design thinking and so on, but most importantly, we believe it is about designers. And you started, I think, Valeria, at the beginning, say machine are not biased because we are designed by human. Essentially, they are designed, human are biased, right? So again, building coders, and maybe it's an opinion from us, is not going to be enough to teach coders. We need to actually teach designers, because tomorrow, I mean, we talk about GPT-3 right now, but 5-10 years from now, you don't need a coder. You'll have already now, we know there's some players that are already building apps just by semantics. So we need to define this designer. And I think this is what part of what we define us as dream builders is that designers. So on this note, I would like to thank you all to participate in these talks and the different questions. This week we have still AI Expo Africa. So for the one that has the questions, and there will be a draw just after this. And the next topic will be on the data privacy. There will be a lot of discussion also from GDPR as well as POPI. So please tune in for that one. And the one after that, I think Maurizio will be joining in for this bias. It will be a bit more technical onto the supervising learning bias. And how do we deal with that and try to dismantle it a little bit for the non-technical people. But almost like it will be almost like a lesson. So thank you very much for all your time. Thank you very much, Valerie, Nomso, for joining us in the dark. And we hope to see you very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you, Mustafa. Thank you.
Thanks.